So this is Coming Out as a Philosopher by Bruno Latour, and this was in Social Studies of Science from 2010, it looks like. And yeah, since semiotics, the rest of this, as always, is not my. I've never read this before. I don't know what's he's gonna say here. My first time reading this, I don't endorse it. We're just trying to see how it goes, and if you stick around to the end, we get to rate it. So here we go. Let me know. When I was reading philosophy, my university professors had warned me that I would never go very far in that direction because I didn't read German, the language of philosophy. They used to say that sort of thing. They did. That's true. And yet I've always had much involvement with Germany through the new koine of English. I'm not alluding to the mass of great white dead German philosophers I read when preparing my Aggregation. I guess that's like his master's or whatever, or undergrad, but to the many friends I've had the good fortune of meeting over here. Bernhard Jorges introduced me to Berlin in the early days of science and technology studies before the fall of the wall, and later I had the good fortune of being allowed to work with Ulrich Beck and his group, with whom I have maintained many strong contacts. Yeah. Lumen says, true story, Latour got offered a job in one of the major U.S. philosophy departments when he was already quite famous in the aughts. Harvard, maybe, and the analytic philosophers organized a petition to keep this Pomo nonsense away, and they ended up rescinding the offer. Wow. That's crazy. Like, even if you think his philosophy is shit, he's going to bring money in. I'm sure that's what the administration was thinking. But, like, you're going to get a lot of attention. You could at least try. Like, yeah. Huh. Yeah, or mostly the common version of Greek. Okay, cool. Thank you, Valpo. Unreal City, a popular version of classic. Okay, yeah. So yeah, when he was reading some classics. Okay. Common people. Yeah. So yeah, when he was just reading stuffs. Okay. Latour continues, is a famous person, but it is when I met Peter Wiebel in Graz that I began, and I apologize how I say German, I don't know how to do it, I'm guessing, that I began to admire even more what could be done in this country, which allowed me to set up 2 major exhibitions in Karlsruhe. First, Iconoclash, and then making things public, feats that would have been unimaginable in any other country. I decided it might not be inconsiderate of me to indulge in a little bit of soul searching and to sketch for you the intellectual project I have always pursued, and that your prize will hopefully help me carry further. Okay, so this is a speech given, and they must be awarding him something. The Bible is the new coin, New Testament, See. If I concentrate on myself, something I have not done since my habilitation 20 years ago, and that's your, that is usually your degree stuffs. Karlsruhe, thank you. But Karlsruhe is like, was that correct? Because that's definitely a British person speaking it, Tindarios. Okay, so they haven't concentrated on himself because he hasn't done it since his school days, is not be assured out of narcissism, but because for the last 20 years I've carefully hidden my big project on a screen of apparently disparate types of studies. Well, it's still Berkshire. Yeah, I was like, why would you think the British guy I have on my TTS is going to say this? It wasn't a joke? The Bible was the New Testament? I didn't think it was a joke. I thought that, like, I believe you. That's the book that gives you tenure. Yeah. So that's like, yeah, the habilitation is whatever they want, like the grouping of stuff that, like, when you're just like a junior professor that you have to put together. So still kind of like school days E. But like, yeah, I shouldn't have said that, what I did say. Thank you. Okay, as Peter Sloterdijk with his usual perspicacity has well understood, I am first of all a philosopher, although not a professional one. Even though I have always held positions in sociology, I have sometimes been accepted as an honorary anthropologist and feel much loyalty to the little field of science and technology studies, and have also dabbled in social theory. I have never left the quest for philosophy. To be sure, I have written on various topics that make my work hard to locate. In French bookstores, the rare buyers complain that my books are spread in too many different aisles. One book on the Conseil d'Etat in the law section, another one on automated subway in the engineering section, while a book on the invisible city of Paris is put, wrongly of course, in the travel section, where a little book on religion has disappeared in the spirituality section, almost as wrongly. And yet I have not dispersed myself at all. It is just that throughout my career I have simply rather disingenuously hidden my real intentions. It is actually through another German scholar whose reputation is somewhat faded that I will start this brief portrait of myself as a philosopher. Thanks to the very run-of-the-mill, but on the whole excellent classical education I received at the University of Dijon, I have the good luck of befriending a former Catholic priest who has become a university professor and Protestant pastor, and who was also the French translator of Rudolf Bultmann. Under André Mallet's guidance, I discovered biblical exegesis, which had the effect of forcing me to renew my Catholic training, but more importantly, which put me for the first time in contact with what I came to be called a network of translations, something that was to have decisive influence on my thinking. Yeah, and so now we're getting into hermeneutics. So like this network of translations thing here, this is I would assume the sort of hermeneutical tradition where you're reading different interpretations of a text and then through all the different readings trying to judge what it means. This guy Latour, that's what I'm saying. Philosophy is and must by its nature be interdisciplinary. Is one your affection? Yeah, well, it should be. It would be better if it was, but I mean, then you've got navel-gazing people like myself which are like, I only want to do what I want to do. I don't care about what other people do. Okay, You might think that Bultmann's radical exegesis would have had the dissolving effect of an acid on the sturdy set of certainties acquired in good Catholic and bourgeois Burgundy. But for me, the result was exactly the opposite. Even though Bultmann himself was trying to reach for authenticity by wiping out, one after the other, every successive edition that had been wildly invented by long chains of Christian locutors, and the result, as you know, was that at the end of the synoptic tradition, just translated by Bultmann, you might end up with no more than 3 or 4 genuine Aramaic sentences uttered by a certain Joshua of Nazareth. The Hermeneutics sounds like a band name. It wouldn't be bad. Like, it's not too bad. And Bruno and the Hermeneutics, exactly. Illuminance. I mean, what would you play? All sorts of like interconnected songs or shit? Okay, my reading was, on the contrary, that it was only in the long chain of continuous inventions that the truth conditions of the gospel resided, provided, that is, that those inventions were done, so to speak, in the right key. It was in this key, this way of discriminating between two opposite types of betrayal by mere repetition and the absence of innovation, and betrayal by too many innovations and the loss of initial intent, that I wrote my PhD thesis. The subject matter was really the spirit of invention, or should I say, the Holy Spirit. Hermeneutics, Graham Harmon too, yeah. Jazz is hermeneutic, that's fair, K-Pars. Like, yeah, it's, hermeneutics is the way semiotics spelled it above, if you're actually asking Frank, and not making a joke about music. But, like, it's the study of how texts are interpreted with respect to each other, because, every text is just referring back to it, and then we're reading all these texts that refer to each other, creating more text about it. So it's a question of interpretation when there is no one standard, like there is no God's word. Well, we have all these interpretations of God's word, and that's what Latour is talking about right here. The music is silent, you have to interpret what it might sound like. I mean, I guess it was the joke, but I do want to clarify. In a way, I had taken the poison out of Bultmann and transformed his critical acid into the best proof we had that it was possible to obtain truth, religious truth that is, through an immense number of meditations, providing that each link was renewing the message in the right manner. Yeah, so I guess Latour is saying, look, the original religious text has to sort of evolve with time, and so that is what the religious truth is how that we continually interpret it over and over time with respect to each other. So as long as you're sort of doing it the right way, which I have no idea what the fuck that means, but I mean, it is in scare quotes right here, you are actually getting at this is the truth is in this sort of progression of cross interpretation. The question being, of course, how to define this right matter precisely enough. I did this through a close reading of Charles Péguy's amazing book Cleo, don't know what that is, the topic and manner of which was precisely on the question of good and bad repetition, a question that was also taken up by Deleuze. So this repetition is a classic topic in philosophy. So even if you don't like postmodernism or whatever the hell else is going on in this paper, you still have to appreciate repetition. This goes all the way back to Plato. We're talking about mimesis, where you're copying something in the world, and what is it to actually make a copy, because you're not copying it in the way that it was. So even if you are an analytic philosopher, you have to realize what is the redundancy theory of truth? Well, you're copying something. And so this is a very deep topic. Even if like we've got some analytic people here, when you start talking about repetition and understanding what's going on, you're going to hit all the philosophy in one way or the other, like all of it. So yeah, so like good and bad repetition, like that is the issue, really. Okay, that my PhD thesis was never read except by rats and mice doesn't mean that it was not for me an essential learning experience carried out, strangely enough, in the heat of Ivory Coast, where I was doing my civil service and learning ethnographic methods, as well as discovering the extent of neocolonialism. Yeah, so this is anyone who talks about repetition in a serious way. Now, it's just getting mentioned here. I'm not saying that this is smart. I'm just saying it's getting mentioned here. Like, you have to pay attention to what people say about repetition. Okay, what Bultmann did for me, I mean my constructed Bultmann put back on his Catholic feet, if I may say so, was that when I entered the biological laboratory in California, where I began my first serious ethnographic field study, I was primed to detect its exegetic dimension in the immense complexity of scientific practice. Hence my fascination for the literary aspect of science, for the visualizing tools, for the collective works of interpretation and barely distinguishable traces, for what I call inscriptions. Frank says, everything is a variation on the same theme if your theme is broad enough. Yeah, and that's the question here. What does it mean to be a broad theme? Because, like, you're going to say, well, everything is a variation. Sure. And then we're getting repetition on some general philosophical topic. So it's like, absolutely. But we are doing this. And what does that even mean? And if you try to discount, well, it's just it doesn't matter because you're getting too general. Well, then you have to define what is too general. And you're going to run into all these weird metaphysical questions. Like what counts as a topic, the same topic, a different topic. And then when you get bigger, why does everything get more and more washed out or the same? And so if you try to actually answer any of these questions, it gets messy very quickly. Yeah. Okay, here too, exactly as in the work of biblical exegesis, truth could be obtained not by decreasing the number of intermediary steps, but by increasing the number of mediations, provided, of course, that each step was carried out in the right key. Here again, for the second time, I was busy defining exactly as I could the right key that would provide the felicity conditions for a long chain of translations. Luminance says, Deleuze's book is also meant to be an inversion of the more usual phrases in philosophy, identity and difference. Okay, I know nothing of that stuff. Good to know, though. It was obvious that the key for ensuring the objectivity of science was entirely different from the mode of ensuring the faithfulness of religious spirit, but this difference did not mean that there was direct certainty in one case and pure invention in the other. In other words, I could already detach myself from the dispute between knowledge and belief and replace those two most confusing terms with two sets of empirically graspable chains of translations that were spreading along two different regimes. Yeah, so I guess the idea here is that the way science works is, of course, there are experiments, but then we have to embed these experiments and how we understand them in the greater scientific milieu, if we're going to be frank, in the whole scene of like people doing science, a whole scientific project, and then also how we talk about that to the greater public. And the way that actually gets done is in this wider discussion. Of course, like to progress science, you have to do experiments, but to understand what's going on is really a wider discussion of what is science. And so I think that is what's going on here. So it's like you start to realize the science happens with the experiment, but the scientific understanding is something else. Okay, immutable mobiles is the name I gave for the reference chains that I first scrutinized in agonizing detail in Roger Guillemin's lab at Salk Institute and later in various other scientific production sites. The name was a bit awkward, but over the years I realized that it was a very handy concept because I now had in hand a comparative method for studying various types of truth production that did not rely on the usual notions, the supernatural and the natural for instance, but instead on two and only two elements, networks of translations on the one hand and on the other the key, the mode or regime in which they were made to spread. This opened me to a very different vista that I'd characterized with the word irreduction and that I summarized in a little treatise at the second part of my work on Pasteur. And he still likes it from 1988. So yeah, so you got to realize, this is what he's saying. Okay, so there's all these people writing about the science that's getting done. And then there's all the people that are spreading like these things. So it's like the marketing of the science and the people trying to explain the science. It's not exactly the same. And that's fair. It's like how it happens in philosophy too. Like there's the teachers teaching the philosophy, and then there's like the wider public and how they understand it. So you got networks explaining what the philosophers are up to, people all like writing secondary literature, and then you've got people trying to actually embed that in society. Yeah. This jokey, self-deprecating style is very Latour. Yeah, I mean, it is a very sort of fun. He's like, I was fucking around and I came up with these ideas and it became helpful, and it was, yeah. So, I mean, it's a talk. This was a speech, it looks like, given on the occasion of him getting some award or something or other. The great surprise came when I had to learn quite bitterly that what I had taken as a rather innocent method to study the truth conditions of science, exactly I had adopted the exegetic method to study the different truth conditions of religious enunciation, was immediately taken by my readers as a debunking of the claims of scientific reason to objectivity. Without noticing it, I had stepped into the middle of a sort of science war that was to have a somewhat unpleasant but also in the end quite fecund influence on my work. Is it fecund or fecund? I always forget. Maybe it's both. A carefully studied, realistic, and generally objective study of scientific chains of reference could be seen as the negation of scientific truth. Yeah, so if you're not talking about what the hard results of the experiments are, people think you're getting away from like the the results of science, the objectivity of science, the hard truth of it. So yeah, like this right here is highlights a little weird in this paper, but like, yeah, so like this is part of the issue, is that you're not doing what the scientists think they're doing. Even if like Latour is correct, this is away from how scientists feel about their work, and that makes people annoyed. It is. Retrospectively, I should have known better. After all, biblical exegesis too had been taken as a dangerous acid test that would destroy faith. Many Catholics still think like that. But since I had a completely positive and constructive reading of Bultmann's chains of translations, I was not prepared to see my reading of scientific mediations taken as a destructive critique of science, but on the contrary, as the only real way to access entities that otherwise would have remained invisible, remote, and inaccessible. I mean, this is fair. You might think, oh, I'm coming at this from a new way, but any new way will undermine the old way. And it's like, all right, yeah, you're going to piss people off when you do this sort of thing. For Latour, constructivism was, well, constructive, not destructive. How wrong I was. I soon realized this when I entered into tense discussions with epistemologists over what was for me a complete red herring, namely the realist versus relativist controversies. It is true that the unfortunate addition of the word social, as in social construction, introduced a bias that has taken me 20 years to redress. Yeah. So, anytime you do something new, it's going to be taken as against the old, even if you think you're building on the shoulders of giants. That's not how the people who are traditionalists are going to take it. And you do have to realize that. And so Latour found out the hard way. Actually, I think everyone finds this one the hard way. If you're first person through the wall gets bloody. Always does. Luhmann says this was a big thing he went deep on in the final years of his life, that he never meant understanding the material conditions, how labs are set up and how they're funded, to undermine science's claims to truth, just to have a deeper understanding of how truth is produced. Yeah, I mean, I think the real trouble is that, scientists tend to be realist about what they're doing. It's one of the reasons they do science. They think they're finding stuff out about the world. God bless them. So to use any other definition than what they were using is they're going to find that as an assault on their understanding. So it's like, yeah. And as an epistemologist, I am an epistemologist. I've seen this like firsthand. People be like, well, you're not talking about what we're talking about. You're not talking about epistemology. I'm like, I'm talking exactly about knowledge and like knowledge acquisition and what knowledge is. What do you mean I'm not talking about knowledge? I remember someone saying like, what you're doing is not epistemology. I was like, maybe it would count as meta epistemology, but like not really. I am making direct claims about knowledge. And you start to realize like, oh, the way people, what they understand to be the theory of knowledge is what they know. It isn't this grand project about what could be knowledge. And so it's like, yeah. And so there's, of course, more scientists than philosophers, and so it's a bigger population. And that's hard. Like, if you didn't realize you were going to step on a lot of toes when doing this sort of thing, it's like, yeah, maybe he could have known, but still. Yeah. This complete disconnect between what I thought I was doing. Yeah. So like he was in it, apparently. Like, he was really in it. A realist description of the scientific network's ability to produce objectivity, and what I was accused of doing, a debunking of science claim to reach the natural objective of the world of matters of fact, soon became for me, instead of the irritating misunderstanding it was at first, a fantastic opportunity to study what in the meantime I had defined as a, quote, symmetric anthropology of the moderns, end quote. If, I told myself, those who defend the value of science can maintain such a gap between what they say science is and what I and my many colleagues in the thriving field of science studies, through a very banal use of ethnographic and historical methods, can see it is, then there is no wonder that the front of modernization that I observed firsthand in Africa and then in California had some trouble defining itself positively. There must be something deeply flawed and also then deeply interesting in how the moderns define, defend, and project their universal values. Yeah, and this is an interesting, like, just this sentence is interesting because these sentences, he's talking about the moderns. Who are the moderns? We are the moderns, like modern philosophers, modern scientists. But the science that we're doing today is basically in the, like, it's what people understand science as, the scientists, are what they inherited from, like, you know, when they were young, they got into science, they thought it was cool. But those ideas were inherited from the philosophers and the scientists of back in the day, from before them. And then they got there and were like, this is cool, I'm going to do this. And so when you talk about modern science, you're actually talking about the science that was developed by philosophers and scientists in like the 1800s and like the early 1900s. And so the way that, like, these universal values he's talking about, this is an inherited concept from like 200 years ago, basically. Aren't we after the postmoderns? Yeah, Dojo. So it's like, yeah, exactly, K-Pars, like the 1750s to the 1914 moderns. But these are the ideas that the contemporary people will have. Because I'm pretty sure that, like the people who are acting scientists today are not the philosophers of science today. The philosophers of the scientists of the future will understand science more like the philosophers today, because it's being hashed out between the, like, there'll be like theoretical scientists and philosophers hashing out what science is, and that'll be the science of the future. But the people he's talking about in, like, you know, the, like, late 1900s and the early 20th century, they've inherited these from, like, you know, the last 100 years, which is the pre-1914. 100 years before 1990 is 1890, which is the moderns, what we call. And so, yeah, we could call the postmoderns. He's a postmodern. And so he's looking at what they're doing in the modernist lens because he's trying to see what's after that. So, like, yeah, we are after the postmoderns. Yeah, I mean, he's a postmodern. And so I guess we're after him, but I don't know. It's hard to say what we are right now. We don't have a good term for it. I mean, I would call everything that's happening now contemporary philosophy. Lumen says he did a lot of work where he would get grants to sit in laboratories and observe how scientists ran their tests and showed how different the actual practice is relative to self-descriptions of what scientists do. Yeah, that's, you know, it's actually very smart what you do, because if you look at the history of science, it's very rarely what the scientists call it or say it is. One of his most well-known books is called We Have Never Been Modern, so it's also kind of a loaded term for him. Yeah, I think it's generally historically accurate what I've been saying. Like, you can yell at me if I was wrong, but the idea that, like, what we're doing is sort of like the science we're doing is sort of conceptually conceived of before the scientists actually do it. It's like, yes, some of the scientists are going to be very forward thinking. A lot of them are just going to be doing the science because the science itself is cool and they're not thinking about the theory. So, yeah. Okay. So, yeah, what is this universal values? Like, that has to be something that was going on from, like, the previous, like, thought. This has to be. In this case, I think modern refers to the Enlightenment cultural idea. We are modern because we go off science and evidence now, not superstition, etc. Yeah, I think that's right. Like, that was the old idea, and that's what we're doing. In Epi, there's at least a renaissance of theory-driven modeling. Cool. Yeah. Lumen says, I don't think anything I said was inaccurate, just adding some more background. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. So it's just like, I'm trying to situate what's going on here, because I don't know much Latour. This is not my area, but I don't think anything he said here has been stupid yet. So it's not even like, oh, stupid continental philosopher. No, it's not what's happening here. He's doing some sort of historical analysis of what's going on, which is fine. Okay. This intuition was to lead me very far, in effect very near to thinkers such as Ulrich Beck and Peter Sloterdijk, whose work I did not know at the time. The moderns don't know where or who they are. They believe as if they were literally homeless. Where they come from, where they go, where they claim to lead the rest of the world they want to modernize seems to me entirely up for grabs. That's fair. Lumen says, I disagreed with him in my dissertation, but I think he's really smart, interesting, actually. Okay, yeah. Well, I always say, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, I disagree with on almost every point he's making. But every topic he's talking about, I think, is fascinating. He had a knack for knowing the right sort of topics. I just think he was wrong about all his takes there. But knowing the right stuff to talk about is a very good philosophical skill. So I always encourage people, like, if you are interested in Jean-Jacques, go read him. I just disagree with his points, but, like, that's part of it. Like, knowing the right topics is most of the battle, actually. K-Par says he gets more frilly in other works, which is still fun, but the sociology is pretty solid. Cool. Okay, this intuition gained from much strength from the next set of field studies I did on technology. At the School of Mines, where I was lucky enough to, Minas, I don't know what that is, where I was lucky enough to be welcomed by a remarkable group of friendly spirits, I was able to study a third network of translation, namely technological projects. And here again, there was barely any connection between the whole modernist discourse what the whole modernist discourse was saying a machine or technology system was, and what I could observe myself firsthand by following their complicated life in several industrial laboratories and in a long field study on a marvelous automated subway called Aramis. Mastery, transparency, autonomy, and efficiency certainly are not the qualities of a project. Yeah. Objects might float in the clear light of res extensa, but certainly not projects constantly running the risk of disappearing, even when they are achieved. Projects are also chains of translations, but this time in a different key, of the ability to maintain a highly complex socio-technological assemblage of heterogeneous constraints. Technology, too, has its felicity and infelicity conditions, different, of course, from those of religion or science, but open to a comparative inquiry. So now I had 3 different keys for 3 different networks of translation. Oh, man. When I was reading this, I was just thinking about the complexity of my stream and the things I run. I've got multiple different systems. And people are always like, oh, can't you just program this? Streamers know. And people who have ever tried to make stream technology know this shit gets unbelievably complicated because you're dealing with different kinds of technology interacting with each other. Like, it's just very weird. It's not a single monolithic thing you can be like, oh, just build your tech and like it'll run. No, you need a lot of interacting pieces, and that makes it very complicated because you're making a lot of different networks of systems. Different systems talk to each other. Now I'm end up sounding more like him, like networks going on here. Yeah. You begin to see how, as the comparative project grew, the other discussion on modernism developed in parallel. If what could be taken as the main impact of modernism, the fantastic development of technologies, could be so badly described by the notion of mechanical autonomous project, and that in practice there is never any object, any Gegenstand, but always projects, assemblies, gatherings, that is, Dinge, what confidence could we have in the overall narrative that moderns were giving of themselves? Okay. And what confidence could we have in the critical discourse of so many anti-modern, anti-science, anti-technology scholars who could not see that they were attacking the moderns for sins they were wholly unable to commit? He threw in for you a little shitting on Kant. I appreciate that. Yep. I had now reached a point where I could gain confidence in my original project. I know it is old since I found an entry in my 1973 notebooks in which it is clearly outlined of systematically comparing truth productions and where I could be more confident of this other project forced upon me by the science wars about the anthropology of the moderns. What was clear to me at least was that the two master narratives of nature and society with which modernism had built what I called its constitution have always been only the most superficial part of what had happened to them. Something else had happened that required a double-edged critique of nature and society. For criticizing the latter, I had to delve into social theory and social theory and to propose, with Michael Callan, under the horrible name of actor network theory, an alternative possibility, which I later discovered had actually been entertained by Gabriel Tard at the beginning of sociology. For the former, that is, nature, the task was much more complicated since it meant a rethinking of much philosophy, as I discovered completely by surprise, of politics as well. Still quite undaunted, beginning in Easter 1987, I started Inners, the first project about comparing regimes of enunciation, what I now call an inquiry into modes of existence, even though I had not published a line about it ever since, until today, that is. Yeah. So, what people say they're up to and what they're actually up to are not usually the same thing. Okay. An entry into a fourth chain of translations was opened to me by a long internship I had in the outfit of Toby Nathan, a student of Georges Devereux, the founder of one daring branch of ethnopsychiatry. Here I was offered a glimpse of how the production of subjectivities could be studied in the same empirical way as the production of objectivities I had followed in several sites. Because Nathan's method was to hold his consultation collectively, I had the rare chance to seize a completely different definition of what it was to produce subjects by following the way he and his co-workers could literally de-psychologize the migrant workers they were treating and reallocate them to other spirits. And spirits here is to be taken materially through the use of techniques developed in various cultures by those who are usually called charlatans or fetishists. I was well aware, naturally, that the notion of individual psychology was a Western and rather recent elaboration, and in addition, I knew firsthand that the modernist narrative around objectivity could not be taken for an accurate description of what an object is, neither in science nor in technology, but until Nathan, I could not see how it was possible to render the translation of psyches, observable. Okay, you guys are talking to each other. This internship had profound influence on me, first because it led me to revise the anti-fetishist tradition of so much religious and Western thought. It resulted later in iconoclash, okay? But second, because the question of finding an ontological status for the divinities invoked so efficiently by Toby Nathan in his Cures was even more puzzling than finding a place for the god of religion, the references of science, and the projects of technology. Obviously, my comparative project required a somewhat drastic overhaul of ontology in order to have enough room, so to speak, to accommodate so many different types of existing entities. Having started out with semiotics as my toolbox through a long frequentation of Grimus work, I had to get into more hardcore philosophy. All right, I have no real idea what he's talking about in any of this shit. This is beyond anything I know, but this is more of a history, so I don't know if it really matters that I have no idea what he's talking about here. Like, he did something. And he's like talking about fetishes. Okay. The breakthrough was made possible for me through the work of Isabel Stengers, certainly the longest-lasting influence on my overall thought, especially her introduction to Alfred North Whitehead, whose fundamental achievements had been largely overlooked by commentators. It was through Whitehead and also William James that I discovered the reason why it was so difficult to find an ontological status for all those other entities I was slowly adding to my list of modern existence, including science, was that a very strange idea of matter and nature had surreptitiously taken place of a fifth mode of existence. Yeah. So, I mean, Whitehead was actually one of the people working with Russell, at the turn of, he was a British philosopher, and he started doing process philosophy. So it wasn't that we're dealing with objects fundamentally, but processes. So, and he's dropped off in analytic philosophy, but been taken up in continental philosophy. But back in the day, it was all the same to them. This is a somewhat hard point to make in a few pages, but suffice it to say that in the modernist idiom, matter is not a taken for granted category, but a historically contingent amalgam of at least two entirely different elements: the way we know, which is generated by the reference chain of science, and the way entities reproduce themselves. And you can see right here, these are processes that Latour is talking about reproduction and the way we know. We come to know things through some process, and the way things reproduce themselves. These are process philosophies, it looks like. The modern parenthesis opened at the time of Locke begun with a new role given to primary qualities, the stuff out of which the objective world is made, and to the secondary qualities, the subjective values that the mind adds to it. The psychic additions is Whitehead's term for it. This distribution of roles has become, over the 3 centuries of modernism, such an entrenched prejudice that every single official category depends on it, and most of all, the sacrosanct distinction between facts and values. Don't tell me. Wait. Oh yeah, that reminds me, he doesn't like Wittgenstein, so he likes to call Whitehead the much more important of the 2 W's. That's funny. Yeah. There are people that like Wittgenstein? Yeah, exactly. Again, the way the history of philosophy has went is like, Whitehead used to be very big in analytic philosophy, and it's gone away from analytic philosophy. Has gone away from Whitehead. He's gotten taken up by other people. But then, the Continentals love the very late Wittgenstein too, and that would be more of a process philosophy too in terms of games. Like, everything is a game with game rules and that sort of stuff. It's not like an object with properties. It's more of a game that defines how you talk about stuff. And so again, this is how, like, I don't know if Latour knew about, I mean, he was alive. This is a 2010 paper, so there's plenty of time for him to have heard about, like, the late Wittgenstein. But still, even back then, not everything was as sort of like distilled as it is now. The way Wittgenstein, the late Wittgenstein, has been taken up by continental thinkers. But, like, yeah. Okay. Latour continues, and yet it is a recent and very baroque invention that takes not a very long empirical inquiry to contest. If in the eyes of Whitehead, William James had put an end to the modernist parentheses, what he calls the bifurcation of nature, is because James has made a shambles of the distinction between primary and secondary qualities. Relations are not what is added to a world of meaningless matters of fact, but what are empirically given in the world of experience. Nature might be made of primary qualities, but not the pluriverse, to use James' term, for a world freed from being defined by only one mode. To be sure, in nature, it is very difficult to give an ontological status to the other entities on my list, but they are to be treated at best as language games, at the worst language, and at the worst pure fantasy. But in the pluriverse, there is plenty of room for other modes of existence, each with its own key. So yeah, see, exactly, at best as language games. So, like, he's even accepting, like, there is some Wittgensteinian stuff going here. Yeah. Let's see, where we're going. I don't know what you guys are talking about. Okay. He was kind of an oddball in the continental stuff too. He also didn't like Heidegger and was big on saying Whitehead should have been the major philosopher of the 20th century. Okay. I mean, I do not know much about Latour, but you can see right here, he's pulling in the language games talk, and what he's talking about, nature as language games, is like this sort of, social thing that's going on, like a network with rules or whatever. Yeah. What seems to Latour to be so liberating in this argument is not only that gods, divinities, projects, and even the production of scientific facts might finally have a pride of place.
This is for Nogga, not Whitehead LUL.
Thank you, Ivan. I appreciate the 28 months of subscriptions. Thank you. But yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, process philosophy, I will admit, I'm not sure I understand it. So it's like, yeah, I'd have to do it. But yeah, thank you, Ivan. I appreciate it. It looks like you've been having some pretty good streams lately. A bunch of people are talking about the stuff, so it's cool. Yeah. What we can do, even though I should have been doing more of this, I haven't given Ivan a shout out in a bit. Let's give Ivan a shout out. If anyone doesn't know our buddy Ivan Neo streams, talk about science, rationality, mind, Bayesian epistemology. And so go hang out with Ivan if you want to have a bit more nerdy discussion that you get here, but also more of a science-based discussion. I'm very much argument-based. He's more of a science-based discussion. So everyone here, go give Ivan a follow. He's been streaming on, Saturdays, I think, recently. It was, he's got some Fun stuff to talk about. Religion, probability, science, knowledge. Yeah. Where was I? Okay, yeah. So the production of scientific facts might finally have a pride of place. Instead of being either squeezed into the subject mind as so many psychic additions or flattened out into the res extensa, but especially that material entities and above all biological organisms have finally room to risk their existence in a medium much more conducive to innovation, to evolution than nature, a medium for which von Uexküll found the right alternative German term, the Umwelt. Yeah, so this is a famous sort of notion in philosophy and German stuff. The Umwelt, like the sort of like the lived world that you're in this. There's not just properties and stuff, but like it's sort of like this interrelated world that you live in because of the way you are. A lot of extended mind stuff depends on this. So a lot of philosophy of mind actually refers to the Umwelt according to the von Uexküll. So like this is an important sort of thing going on here. All right. In a sense, Whitehead offers the first philosophy to absorb the immense philosophical importance of Darwin's discovery of evolution, a discovery that has been thwarted by Bergson's Elan Vital, as well as by social and neo-Darwinism with their search for optima produced by some blind watchmakers. The immense importance of this fifth mode of existence is that it is not another failed attempt to add some spiritual dimension to a reductionist and mechanical worldview, but on the contrary, is a way to subtract from the ill-conceived bags of matter and of nature a spurious spirituality borrowed for scientific and political reasons, as I soon learned by getting into the politics of nature. The most black metal name in philosophy, von Uexküll? Yeah, maybe. Like that actually... Luminance, have you ever read the von Uexküll? You can get it. I have the PDF somewhere. But like you'd actually quite like it. It's a very like being in the world sort of take on things. I think this is one of, and it gets mentioned in analytic philosophy sometimes. The way I read it was because they don't want to talk about Heidegger. They'll go back to the von Uexküll though, because it's more sciencey. Okay, to usher ourselves out of nature is the only way to put an end to the modernist parenthesis while avoiding the negative and somewhat desperate solutions of postmodernism. You see that through a totally different route and through some pretty arduous metaphysical, or should I say infraphysical arguments. I had come very close to two other German thinkers who have also tried to divine the end of modernism. Beck through the notion of risk society and of a second or reflexive modernity, and Sloterdijk with his extended inquiry into the notion of spheres. Seen it referenced, plenty but never actually read it. Definitely will give it a read if you recommend it. It's short. Let me go, if you remind me or if I remember, I can try to go look it up. It's not very long. It's a short thing you can just look at. And it has pictures. I love philosophy with pictures. It has pictures. Yeah, you get to talk about, the fuck are those things called? Little bloodsuckers. Ticks. The three of us share the same argument that the moderns reside in an entirely different place than nature and its progressive extension to the planet. We also share the argument that there is a gigantic gap between what the moderns say they are and what they have done and do. I mean, this is always the case with, you have to look at what people are doing and not what they say. Pictures, exactly. The style's method and empirical insights may be entirely different, but the common question is to define as starkly as possible what the successors of the notions of modernity and more generally of the West are. As Sloterdijk so ironically said, we Europeans used to love globalization when we were the ones doing it. Now that we are being globalized by others, we don't find it fun anymore, and we suddenly clamor for roots, walls, sites, niches, and as the French say, cultural exceptions. I mean, this is, a great line right here. It's like, hey, welcome to like dealing with everyone else and not just killing everyone else. It's like, see what happens? Not so fun anymore, is it? The globes of science, technology, politics, whose universal values that we were pretending to extend to the whole planet, this is the topic of the second volume of Sphären, appear now as so many ruins of a project that cannot be carried out any longer, since its universality has been achieved too cheaply and too fast. The globes, so to speak, did not resist globalization. And yet, the three of us, it seems to me, are convinced that those ruins are a great chance to finally come to the definition of what modernity has been. Yes, the moderns might finally come home. Home is in Greek oikos, and this is why the alternative I propose between modernization and ecologization might not be a bad term to define the next step. Between modernity and ecology, we have to choose. Ecology is not the science of nature, but the reasoning, the logos about how to live together in livable places. As I have shown at great length in Politics of Nature, ecology will succeed only if it is not a re-entry into nature, this mixed bag of narrowly defined concepts, but if it gets out of it. What is another way to try to define the spheres of breathable existence, the architectures of which Sloterdijk has so powerfully sketched? Yeah, exactly, like the yokers. So I was thinking about. Will the moderns finally settle on some durable and sustainable site? To twist Marshall Sahlins' marvelous witticism, nature is a nice place to visit, but nobody lives there. Yeah, it says reality instead of nature. Okay. You still think it, even though you read it in Heidegger? Yeah. It's good yogurt. I am convinced that, yeah, so if you guys don't know, there's a Oikos brand yogurt around here. So, and it's good. Wait. What is Oikos? Is it, one of them is a New York State brand. I'm trying to remember what it is. Oikos might be a New York State brand, actually. But, like, then it expanded. But, like, there's one of them that's actually a New York State brand. I forget which one. It's home. No. It is home. Like, Oikos means home. This is what they were just saying. But, like, Oikos is literally New York State. No. Like, it's might be manufactured in upper New York State. So, like, being from New York, you actually heard this brand being mentioned. I don't remember if it's Oikos or something else, as like an upstate New York success story that, like, you know, one of like their local little brands got very big and was like, you know, a major employer. So yeah, I don't remember if it is. There's one of them though. So, but like if you're in New York, you'll hear like the upstate politicians talking about it, because I'm downstate. Like, yes, exactly. Okay, I am convinced, or Latour is convinced, that the project is feasible precisely because Europe, by fast losing its exaggerated dominion, has also lost some of its hubris that had made its presence at defining universality for all the others so cheap and so incoherent. Moments of weakness are a great occasion to finally come to grips with what we hold most dearly. This is what makes globalization so interesting. At the negotiating table, the former moderns might finally be able to articulate what they were after all along. In the end, what are the values you are ready to die for? Chobani is your favorite philosopher. It might be Chobani that's New York State, actually. Now I'm going to go look this up. Hold on one second. Chobani in New York State. Is this it? Yeah. Here we go. Chobani. 1.2 billion in upstate New York to build third U.S. dairy plant. This is what I'm talking about. Like, this is April 22nd, 2025. So like, yeah. New York is where Chobani's journey began. It's a perfect start to Chobani 20 years ago. So no, it wasn't Oikos, it was Chobani. But like, yeah. Oh. But like, yeah. So the yogurt wars is a personal, like a local issue for me. Ivan says, this weird diversion makes me think Latour's metaphysics isn't serious. Like my weird diversion into yogurt? Yeah, maybe. But the simple fact that doing science and then understanding science aren't the same thing. You can't deny that. The understanding of science is different from the doing of it. Like, the results are one thing, and then how we interpret the results are something else. Yeah, not the yogurt? Okay. How are we going to apply metaphysics to colonialism? Well, the idea isn't applying metaphysics to colonialism. The idea is that who was doing the colonialism, and were they honest about what they were up to themselves? Because these are also the people that were doing science. So our scientific background is done by the same people doing the colonialism. And so the question is, can we finally understand the sort of people that these projects came out of? Do we understand the people that are making the science that also make the colonialism? Science more so than metaphysics here. Yeah, exactly. This is more a question about what are the projects that we ourselves get ourselves up to in terms of science, but also in terms of like this world globalization and domination in terms of colonialism. So the question is, what kind of people are these, and like, what are we doing? So that's why it's like we're not really talking about metaphysics, but who are the sorts of people and what sort of projects do they undertake? What were they after? What have we inherited from the past all along? It's more historical and scientific than metaphysical, really. Now, the methods Latour is using to analyze this does definitely touch on the metaphysics, but that's not. It's like that seems like he was forced into that by his questions, not really what he's been getting himself up to all these years. Okay, continuing. And here you may see how my project of systematically comparing the various felicity conditions that have been developed in the course of European history could come in handy. For instance, at the dying. For instance, at the negotiating table, it is not at all the same to attempt to defend science with a capital S, or to make sure that we can extend the long reference chains that produce objectivity, provided they are set up in the right way to allow a two-way transfer of immutable mobiles. Luhmann says one of his central claims is that the context behind science that determines what gets funding, that are worth researching, etc., can't be separated from the science itself. Yeah. But this is the thing, is how science gets done. Who cares about it and who's going to pay for it? That's a political question. But it's tied up, of course, into what the scientists are doing and how they themselves understand what they're up to. The first actually obfuscates the development of the second, so much that the very crucial value of scientific practice, so essential to the definition of our tradition, is jeopardized by a defense of science with a capital S, which bears almost no relationship to it. Yeah, so what people think science is versus the actual doing of science can get separated. And that's fair. Like, one is the political thing, what people think the science is, versus the doing of the science. And the same is true of technology. There is no relation between pretending to extend or restrict the expansion of objects and promoting or resisting the extinction of projects. So what should be universalized? I mean, you can see this now. I mean, the United States, like, we thought we were going to be like, we're going to efficientize, we're going to make everything like new tech. And, we have done nothing in the last few years along these lines. We keep saying that shit, and we're just wasting more and more money and effort. So, I mean, this year seems like the worst, though. Maybe I'm wrong. Hopefully I'm wrong. So what should be universalized? Science and technology, or reference and projects? These are two entirely different definitions of the sets of values we might wish to introduce into the negotiation over what is universality and what is the global. And the same is true, I could show in greater detail, of all the other modes, especially religion, politics, and law. It is as if the moderns had suffered from an embarrassment of riches and could not promote or highlight one value without having to squeeze out or gainsay the truth conditions of another. They had no occasion, they were too busy pushing forward their modernizing frontier. I don't have the space to get into those other contrasts that have been adduced or repressed by the complicated history of the West, and that taken together form the architecture of what the moderns have been after all along. I just want to say a word about law as an original mode of existence. The practice of law has seemed to me so important that I invested a long field study into understanding its chains of translation. Its great interest for me was that, in contrast to religion, technology, fiction, and politics, law has suffered much less from the modernist invention of matters of fact. In a way, law has never been modern, always insisting on its original type of truth condition and its completely specific key, even though the temptation of a scientific approach to law has always been there. Allowed to attend the daily work of French Supreme Court for the administration of law, the Conseil d'Etat, I have been able once again to detect the manner in which long series of meditations could carry forth the passage of law. Still another key. That's interesting. It's true. Law has a lot of precedent matters in law. So what came before, and so you're going to get precedent from pre-modernist times, from like before 1700. And so that holdover, I guess Latour is saying, insulated the law from really being reformed over the last few hundred years. It's in some sense something both older and different. So that's interesting. I mean, and that is a historical, sociological fact about how law moves, not so much philosophical, but it's still interesting because it means that different philosophies are at play. Okay. Nothing will be achieved, however, in this anthropology of the moderns or in this infraphysics of Europe or regional ontology, depending on how we want to call it, as long as the other oikos, that is economics, is not fully anthropologized. Also, once out of nature, this first nature, the moderns are still thrown into this second nature defined by the iron laws of economy, which no longer is their rightful home than the first, and where all the defects of their strange contradictory construction are made even more damning. Yeah, so now we're getting the everything's capitalism, yeah, capitalism bullshit here. He's like, yeah, you're doing the same thing again. If it is true, as I have argued all along, that modernity can be recalled, meaning that we should finally remember what it is really made of, but also that we are responsible for rectifying the defects of the product that we have sold all too well to the rest of the world, the same way an automaker recalls a flawed car, the project of modernity will not be achieved as long as we have not been able to recall economics. A task, strangely enough, more arduous than freeing scientific practice from the idea of science with the capital S, or helping religion and also politics to sing again in their respective keys. Yeah, I mean, we exist in a capitalist economy, and that really means that people with money hold the power a lot of times here, and so it's harder. You might say it's easier to deal with, to make changes in places where there's less money because there's less entrenched interests. So it's like, yeah. I mean, so like science doesn't have a lot of money, all considering. It doesn't. It's like that's not where the money is. It's not like physics departments are the richest place on campus. They're not. The football team is usually here in the U.S. So it's like, how do you actually, you might be able to make more change in science than you do when it comes to who's holding the purse strings. No doubt that this project and its double extension, first the systematic comparison of the modes of existence, and then their inclusion into the negotiation about what globalization will be and how the former moderns can play a role in it, is somewhat oversized for a limited mind. But ever since I discovered in Africa the ambiguous effect of the modernization frontier, I've been convinced that the moderns deserve a full-scale, positive and constructive anthropology. To say that they are moderns and modernizing the planet means nothing, but to claim as I did that they have never been modern is a first but only a negative step that does not describe positively what they have been and thus what they might wish to become. I want to have a go at this positive definition of the set of values that has been unto now so badly presented. Yeah, so after all of this, we get 2 more paragraphs about like what the world actually we have inherited in terms of philosophy and people. If I dared to reveal my entire mad project to you, I would confess that I always had this odd dream of being able to do for contemporary collectives what had been done on the Elgin marbles for the Pantheistic Festival, a procession that is a theory of ambassadors, and thus not a critique of the various modes of existence, each with its own incommensurable and yet fully respected truth conditions. You see how drunk I am. And yet I can't help it. There is an urge consubstantial to the philosophical tradition, whenever you are told to limit yourself to a well-defined speciality, to jump on the other side of the fence in order to embrace the whole. Naturally, the global will never come back, and fortunately so, but that does not mean that the other figures of the whole are not there to be detected and composed. I want to have a go at it. At last, a last wish with which to conclude. Please don't tell anyone, especially in the UK or the US, that such is my overall life project and that I am, in effect, a philosopher. Worst of all, a philosopher with a system. They will never take me seriously again. Only under a German sky is one allowed to think that big. That's so cute. So cute. You give me like, look, I'm in Germany. I get to do a project in Germany. And the Germans understand. That's such a cute, idea. Anyway, what do you think about this little speech of Latour's about his grand history and the way he sees the world here? He's drunk with the German dream of gonna have a overall philosophical project where he gets to, expose the modern project for what it is. What have we become in terms of a people, and what are we doing across the world? And Germans' love for systematic philosophy. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so as always, these are my emote review. If you are in chat, you are welcome to review right now. Thank you, Luminance, for giving us a brain dance and a navel gazing. If you thought this was fun and gave you some fun ideas, made the brain dance, give it a brain dance. Spelling and capitalization do count here. Nog Scream for existential artistic drama, Nog Oro for an Ouroboros for deeper ancient ideas, Nog Knife for slicing and dicing arguments, Nog Navel for navel gazing only for academics, Nog Turd all style no substance still poop underneath, and Nog Grapes for big claims that shrivel up. You can also use the global vote yay and vote nay of Twitch, just for general thumbs up, thumbs down, and my vote meh. Note, I do calculate an overall score, and anything in the green will make the overall score go up, everything in the red will make it go down, and the meh actually makes it go to the middle. Ivan gave it a nay and a navel gazing. Thank you, Ivan, for voting. Dojo gave it a brain dance. Thank you. Lemons is not really an argument, just kind of a retrospective. I feel like I got more out of it from having read a lot of the things he's referencing. Yeah, this is part of the difficulty. Not everything in philosophy is an argument. Sometimes things are surveys of different stripes. So you read a survey paper in philosophy and you're like, okay, I just heard what is going on in an area, and this is a survey of like Latour's history, kind of, and how he sort of conceives of things. It's not that's like a legit thing to be doing, but like, it's not like, hard research is going on right here. It's an overarching perspective. K-Pars gave it a scream, a navel gazing, a brain dance, and a meh. Cool. Thank you. Lumen says it feels like a speech at which he must have been the keynote speaker or something. Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. I think he was given an award of some sort. Does it say? Yeah, I think he was given it because at some point he said, I was given this like award and this is what I'm going to do with it. So maybe he's doing something there. What's up, Retheus? How you doing? I'm doing all right. A major award, yeah. Well, he went to Germany. He got something. That's what it is. Okay, what do I think? A leg lamp. Hey, don't we all want one of those? That's great. Dory says, I like a survey that provides points of reference into his path. I look forward to reading more. Yeah, I mean, he's a big name. I don't know much about this area of philosophy. Never studied it, never really read it. But he is like a big name in this area, so it's, yeah. Who knows? All right, what do I think? I don't think it got a little jargony every so often, so I'm kind of with Luminance here. Gave me some fun ideas, because I don't know this stuff, but it's like, it is like a little navel-gazy to me, too. It's like, it's okay. It's like, this is an okay thing. It's just like, it's very neither here nor there, because, as you were saying, it's an overview of a lot of what he was up to. So it's like, yeah. But anyone else want to get in now? Now's the time to rate. It wasn't inaccessible. Granted, this is a speech, and quite often, I think as a speech, it is a, let's see, do I have the link here? No. Yeah, so he's talking about his project. So it's like, yeah, you do have to make it a little bit more accessible, but then again, this sort of speech, we've read these things before, like these addresses, you're talking to friends. And so when you're talking to friends, you can also make a lot of assumptions because the people are there to see you and they already know your work. And so you can cut corners that you might not normally cut because the people are expected to have a background that's in your area. French, yes. Cinesemiotics give it a yay. Yeah, thank you for suggesting the Cinesemiotics. I mean, it's not bad. It's not bad. Lumen says, I disagreed with him at length in his dissertation, but I guess that also means his work is significant enough to be worth responding to at length. No, exactly. That's what I always say about Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I think he's wrong, but he's significant. Yeah. The Lumens gave him a yay. Yeah. So, you're going to get a split on stuff like this. It's just how it goes. Not everyone's going to like this stuff. It's also a survey. And so some people are like, well, I didn't learn anything. It's like, all right, that's fine. And some people are going to say like, yeah, I did learn something. Because like Dojo says, it's like, it gives me an overview of a topic. And so I do like it.